Now it's time to cross to London and speak with Associate Editor of The Spectator and the best-selling author of The War on the West, Douglas Murray. Douglas, we're going to get to the shambolic mess that is the Tory party in just a minute. But first, I want to speak about the NHS advising doctors that most children who believe that they are transgender are just going through a phase. And they also warn medical professionals not to encourage children to change their names and pronouns. And really, this advice is so refreshing. It's a big change to some of the dangerous practices that we saw under the Tavistock model.
It certainly is. I'm still very sceptical about this. I'm sceptical about all such U-turns which seem to happen so swiftly. And I'm particularly upset about it, actually, for one reason, which is that just consider all of the young children, all of the young people whose lives have been irreversibly ruined by the NHS, like other health authorities across the Western world, not taking this simple, sensible, adult and pragmatic approach years ago. You know, our societies did not have to derange themselves about the issue of gender. We didn't need to spend the best part of the early part of the 21st century wondering what a woman is and wondering what a man is and pretending that gender is performative. And that if you just say, if you're a girl and you say, I'd like the blue slippers, that you're actually a boy and that you need to be put on all sorts of drugs and drugged into some other state. You know, the last few years, particularly the last decade, I wrote about this in my book, The Madness of Crowds, the last decade has been deranged on these subjects. And so, you know, I'm very happy that various health authorities have woken up to this, have recognized young people are, for instance, impressionable, highly suggestible, and much, much more. And that if you say to them, gosh, if you feel slightly awkward in your body as a teenager, it's not because you're a teenager, but you're actually the opposite sex, and you can be really badly approximated to look like a member of the opposite sex. You know, I just wish that these authorities had done this years ago and had been grown up and sane instead of becoming totally deranged and helping to derange our societies.
Well, they have been deranged, and I think there are going to be some very large class action lawsuits coming, and we've already seen some legal action with people who have regretted what's been done to them, and they really weren't of an age to submit to this sort of irreversible treatment. So I think we're going to hear a lot more about that in the coming decades. But the NHS is starting to see sense, but Channel 4 viewers were confronted with this debauchery, I guess. So that we've obviously pixelated all the key areas, but that's a trans woman with breasts and penis, male genitals. Do you not have any indecent exposure laws in the UK, Douglas?
Of course, that's a guy, as far as I can tell. It's a guy who's trying to look like a woman and has decided to behave in that very feminine way of flashing his penis and playing a keyboard with it. A typical feminine behavior, I think you'll agree with me, Rita. It's the sort of thing which is shocking, but I think in the long term will completely subvert the cause which this person is purporting to advance, apart from, of course, the fact that this person is clearly just trying to primarily advance themselves, and becoming notorious and so interesting and to shock us bourgeois people. No, I mean, if this person has any interest in trying to further trans rights, they should know that, I mean, this is just set it back, you know, another step. Because most people, you know, there are some trans people who basically, like the late Jan Morris, want to just sort of get on with their life quietly in the sort of sex that they sort of, for some reason, feel they in. But no, I mean, most trans people wouldn't do this, and most women, it goes without saying, wouldn't do this. And I think the most offensive thing about these blokes who pretend that they're women is when they then just behave in such an womanly way and think that they're just sort of shocking the rest of us, when the rest of us, frankly, are mainly bored to death by these look at me people.
There's a lot of look at me about that, and I've seen the longer version, and we will not inflict it on you. Now, to Boris Johnson, he's no longer in contention to be Prime Minister again. The race is down to Penny Mordaunt and Rishi Sunak. Who's going to be the next PM, Douglas? And do they have any chance, Douglas, of uniting the Tories behind them? I mean, how did it come to this? This is a party that won in a massive landslide, and now they're in utter disarray.
They are in utter disarray, and it's very sad to see. And in actual fact, Boris Johnson's purported return has proved to be exactly typical of him. If he had been serious as Prime Minister, there were so many things he would have done. He would not have tried to outflank the Greens by being greener than thou. He would not have wasted time as he did. He would not have wasted the party and the country's time as he did, and he wouldn't have had his feet up on the desk when he was actually in power. And here he was for a few hours trying to come back and reclaim number 10. But why was he late? Because he was on holiday, Rita. He was on holiday in the Bahamas, on a holiday paid for by somebody else. Parliament was in session. He's still an MP. He should still have been in Parliament, voting, backing the government, or whatever he wanted to do. But as it happened, at the moment of what could have been his return, Boris was behaving exactly as we have learned Boris behaves. He was enjoying himself. He was having a comfortable time with his wife. He was putting his own interests ahead of the interests of the nation. So when he did finally get a plane back late to the UK to try to rally his supporters, he found once again it was too late. Time had run out and the joke had run thin.
Well said. I think you have summed up precisely what happened there. I've heard a lot of analysis of the Boris question, but yours the best. Now, you've written about these crazed climate change vandals attacking great works of art and then super gluing themselves to the floor or the wall. The latest such attack saw Greenie protesters attack a Monet in Germany, this time not tomato sauce or tomato soup, but mashed potatoes. Have a look.
Hello. Unbelievable.
Douglas, how should we handle these destructive dimwits?
I'm going to tread very carefully here, Rita, as I did in my column in The Spectator about this, because I don't want to incite violence very much. But I would suggest that there should be effectively a bailout fund set up to protect any member of the public who goes in and grabs these people and stops them doing what they're doing. You know, I think that there should be an effort by the general public not to stand by as civilization is trashed by these end-time cultists. I don't simply think we should be observers as our cultural inheritance is despoiled and ruined and has paint and soup and mashed potato thrown against it. I can't think of another era in recorded civilized history when people would have just stood by and allowed this to happen. I was in the Uffizi in Florence last week and took the opportunity to congratulate the security guards there to do what they've also done in France, which is when people do this kind of vandalism, rip them off the place that they've glued themselves to, throw them away from the thing, prevent them from doing the vandalism they want to do. Don't just stand by as the barbarians try to break through the gates. Stop them. So I hope that members of the public will do that. I would trust that the great Australian public will be able to do that. I'd like to see the British and other publics do that as well. Since security guards at so many institutions, let alone the police in so many of our countries, just like to sort of stand by with a walkie-talkie and ask the protesters if they're feeling okay and if they'd like any water, perhaps. Since the police won't do their job in stopping this, and since the security guards won't stop the people doing this, I would suggest the general public do this. Get stuck in, step in there. Don't allow these people to just destroy our cultural inheritance. These people are literal barbarians. They think nothing of destroying works of art. They're people that we have seen throughout the ages, but we never just sat by quietly and allowed them to do it. In the past, whenever these sorts of people arrived, we tried to stop them. And I suggest we do the same thing now.
Well, I'm ashamed to say we had a similar event happen here in Melbourne, this sort of far-left greenie activism, and there was no citizens' arrest. People did, as we've seen in Germany and London and elsewhere, they just stood there and watched, and as did security. Now, finally, we don't have much time, but I want to ask you about the revelations that comic James Corden is apparently, well, a bit of a nightmare when it comes to how he treats waiters and others he deems to be beneath him. And The Sun reports that he's not alone. A new book alleges that a very aloof Meghan Markle watched on as an aide demanded a private area for her at a posh restaurant. The now Duchess of Sussex handler then name-dropped Prince Harry by saying she needed a table, a private table, because it's for someone who is dating a prince. But the maitre d' apparently was not impressed and did not help out. Douglas, what do you make of this?
I'm afraid it's one of the oldest stories that we know in the world of celebrity reacher, isn't it? Remember Ellen DeGeneres loves to pretend to be this sweet, cutesy little girly sort of dancing around, turned out to be horrible to the people she was working with. Turns out to be the same with James Corden. Surprise, surprise, Meghan Markle. It's an absolute rule that you can stick to, that the people who pretend to be absolutely sweetest in public celebrity life are nightmares behind the scene. And by the way, many of the people who are thought to be not particularly pleasant in the public eye are quite often perfectly charming in private. So I just think this is very typical celebrity behavior. You pretend to be so sweet and cutesy and charming, and actually you're a total nightmare. This is one of the oldest celebrity stories, and it's absolutely... I'm not surprised at all that James Corden's a nightmare. I would expect it.
Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time this evening.